Hey all, welcome back. So last time was foundations of New Spain and the backstory to all of that. What big point there is Spain goes into the Siglo de Oro, the age of gold, the glory days of Spain, with the plunder of the Aztec and Inca, and then later the silver mines that the Spanish create in the New World, which are and the mining here is by slave labor, first native, and then Africans. Okay, and the fight all along with the contest with the Jesuits, Franciscans, and Dominicans, and how that leads to an actual debate in Spain, and what comes out of that, and ending with Philip II's mandate that missions must follow, and this after a long uh, back and forth between conquistadors and a lot of policy being set on the ground in New Spain, Viceroyalty of New Spain, with the mandate that Philip II that missions be established are required for any more expansion in his name. Okay, so that's where we were last time. Hopefully that was clear, and we're picking up there today. And what happens next is we get these entradas, these expeditions into what today is the United States, and by conquistadors who want to repeat the successes of Cortez and Pizarro and others, and generally disastrous failures, but are forced to take missionaries along with them. So we get the mission era, which we're reading about this week. Okay, and here's a good map of well, it shows the effective frontier of Spanish settlement and what the Spanish claim in North America, and the way that they break up the New World into these different viceroyalties, New Granada, in today's Bolivia area, and then in the south La Plata, and Mexico is viceroyalty of New Spain. So that's the era we're talking about. Okay, so we get these entradas, which are these explorations into today's United States. The Spanish send or patent these conquistadors to do this to the northern borderlands. They're looking for for gold, and specifically for the seven cities of Cibola. That legend that these El Dorado has not yet been found, and these always feed off of the rumors that are mostly from First Nations people, which, by the way, Americans still call Indians, and that's what any American text will, and ours will as well. So try not to be put out by that. It's simply a fact. Even academics and scholars there, as well as Native people in the United States, use that term, and Native American, they use them interchangeably. But if I slip and use it, don't think I'm some backwater bigot. It's my American focus. In any case, so here we go. Narvaez expedition is our first, and there's a great map of that. And this one is the most amazing. It doesn't go well at all. They go in with 600 people, including a bunch of priests in Florida. Narvaez, a conquistador, and his second in command is a guy named Cabeza de Vaca, and he stumbles out 9 years later with only 3 other survivors among the Spanish, as well as hundreds of natives who are following him as a prophet, and he's become their shaman, their leader. It's an incredible story. There is a film about it. Unfortunately, it's not great. It's and it's dubbed Cabeza de Vaca, but it's an incredible story. And what happens along the way, everyone else dies off and is killed by the natives in war with the natives. But why Cabeza de Vaca survives is he's taken slave, as many of the Spanish are, and he manages to convince at one point that he's a healer, because he does the sign of the cross on a native warrior who then recovers. So he gets a reputation as a healer. At one point, he's on the coast near Galveston, on the islands there near Corpus Christi area, and he's trading shells and other seafood goods from the sea to interior tribes, which is fascinating in itself. In any case, and then eventually he's making his way to try and get back to Mexico City, and he finally stumbles out on a group of Spanish slave traders who have been raiding natives and are taking them back to Mexico City, and they find his haggard band. And he comes out with a powerful message and becomes a crusader for the rest of his life for a different way of doing things. Specifically, he says that the native people, and he's proven it with his own following, are receptive to the gospel, to being evangelized. But if you meet them on their own terms, don't come with power, but meet them with humility. He's encountered a lot of things by this point, knows natives very well. He's seen things Europeans are not accustomed to: homosexuality, child sacrifice. He's seen everything. But he's come to know the native tribes very well in a region that is about to be radically changed and depopulated from the diseases that these explorers are bringing with them. Okay, so next big fill is the De Soto Entrada, and that is an expedition by Pizarro's colleague, Hernando de Soto, and he goes in with about 400 men into Florida, spends 3 years tromping around Florida, war with the native tribes there, and then they stumble their way over to the Mississippi River. De Soto has kept himself alive by playing on the deity card, that he is a deity. The natives, when he dies, his men are afraid that will be discovered, so they hide his body. They go down the Mississippi, and they end up coming out at the coast, and half of them make their way back to Mexico City. The next is Coronado. Now Coronado comes to the New World when he's a young man, and he ends up as an encomendero through marriage. So he ends up quite wealthy, and he's a provincial governor in northern Mexico. And he of course, everyone knows about the Cabeza de Vaca stories and the Narvaez expedition. Now, what everyone heard from that wasn't his message about how you should evangelize the natives and how you should treat them with respect, but they do hear his stories of rumors of gold cities, which he gets from the natives that he's been with, that they're always somewhere just a little bit further down, and that these just, it's amazing the thematic continuity in these stories and how they always persist. And partly it's fed on by the gullibility of Europeans and natives telling them what they want to hear, but also these mystical ideas of the West that go back to antiquity, that never really die, even in the face of all these disappointments in the New World. And then, of course, are fed with the fact that there were these amazing successes in points further south and other civilizations. In any case, all of that, there's a lot more that's been written on that kind of a thing and why Europeans are so gullible. And but yes, Coronado heads out after sending out one of those survivors in that little group, Cabeza de Vaca, one of those 3 other survivors. He was a priest, and Coronado sends him back up to look for these fabled cities. On a small expedition. He comes back and says he saw them, but he didn't get into them. What he saw was the Zuni pueblos. So Coronado, stoked by this, he goes up north and makes it all the way into, finds the pueblos. They're not what he expects. Leaves the priests there for that's 1542, and then goes all the way up to today's Kansas. He's the first to see the Grand Canyon and the Colorado River, first European, and makes it all the way to the Central Plains, to this on rumors of this city, and that specifically he takes a native guide along who says he's from there and been there. And when he gets to this village, of which is like the Mandans or something, he's more than a little disappointed, and he actually executes this native guide. So that's the Coronado expedition, and basically what you get from that is well, the Spanish know the region better, but that's about it. Permanent settlement begins when the crown gets behind it, and actually the first permanent. The first permanent settlement, though, is not in the Southwest where most think. The first permanent settlement is here in Florida. Florida is a bit of a dark hole, a black hole in terms of most people's knowledge of what happens with, and it's a fascinating history actually, and this is really where the first haven of religious dissenters begins here in America. That story begins with the Huguenots coming to Florida and fleeing, leaving France 10 years before the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. But things are not great in France for Huguenots, even though they're very well off. But they head over to Florida and establish a colony there called Fort Caroline, and it's about 30 miles north of St. Augustine. This is 1562, and shortly after that, the Spanish come along and they set up St. Augustine, and they head north and they massacre every single one of those Huguenots. So that's the end of this first experiment of America as a religious haven, the New World as a religious haven. So, which is fascinating and important, and most people do not know about this. They equate that first experiment with the Pilgrims and the Puritans, but not so. But in any case, as I said, short-lived. But what happens in Florida is a real intentionality about bringing in missions and converting all the natives here. And there's probably about 350,000 native people that live in the Florida Panhandle when the Spanish first arrived. But disease is doing a goodly number on them already. Good book about this if you're interested, Laboring in the Fields of the Lord. What we want to know, other than the Huguenots, is constant warfare with the English as they gain a foothold on the coast north of here, as the British colonies begin, which become the American, the American slaveholding states, and Carolina being a very an early colony of settlers, a slave colony from the very beginning, and tension always with the Spanish, with Spanish Florida across the way, which up until this point has had amazing reach all the way up to today's Jamestown, as you can see there in that blue on the right map. That's as far as the Spanish managed to control before the English got control in this region. In any case, most of the missions are destroyed in a war in 1704-6 by the English, so that's northern Florida, and the mission era doesn't. The days of Spanish control here are numbered. And by the way, the Spanish are very intentional about keeping control of Florida, and why they're here, why they put so much resources and establish St. Augustine, is because it protects the galleon trade that comes out of the Isthmus of Panama from the silver mines. So this is a strategically important spot, and they'll hold it right up until 1818. By that point, Florida has become a haven for runaway slaves, maroons. Maroons, and this is really the Achilles heel of the slaveholder, is that America has a lot of space, and especially in the South with the swamps, and that slaves can run away to and establish their own free settlements, which they do. And it becomes enormously enticing after 1818 for slaves to run into Florida, because by that point Spain has abolished slavery. Before that, even though, we have the Spanish encouraging maroon runaways to convert to Catholicism and then gain their freedom, and then head north and do damage against the English colonists. And a great example of that is the Yamasee War, which is more native tribes in the Carolina region that combine together, and they attempt to destroy Charleston and destroy the entire colony. And they almost succeed until they become fractured. But they're aided by maroon runaways, and they're aided definitely by the Spanish to the south. So Fort Augustine is this mecca, and where with Catholicism you gain your freedom. And in fact, the Spanish set up a fort called Fort Mose just outside St. Augustine for runaways like this. And this is really the origins too, and this is probably one of the main legacies actually, because the 350,000 natives who lived here are pretty much completely gone by the 19th century, through disease and also through incorporation in other tribes to the north. Okay, that's the only that is how some of these Florida natives persist, but most of these tribes are completely wiped out. Now, and that's really the legacy of the Spanish mission period, is probably strongest among the Seminoles. because the Black Seminoles are Maroons who ran away and joined with the Seminole tribe in northern Florida Panhandle, and and they to this day are largely Catholic. Okay, so in terms of a legacy, there's so much blending in this region that it's really difficult to establish any clear lines going way back. But this is the legacy of the Spanish era, and also that important point about the Huguenots. So that's Florida. Okay, and as I said, by 1818, no longer Spanish control. In the West, we also have effective control, finally, permanent control, beginning with Don Juan de Onat, 1598, so later than Florida. And this is a crown directive to establish a settlement here in New Mexico. The crown sends up 400 soldiers and colonists, and Don Juan de Onat then this is runs into, and this is the region of, he sets up Santa Fe as his provincial capital. So the Spanish want control over this borderland region, and largely that is the story that we're going to see through from Texas to California. It is an attempt to really just establish hegemony here, and taking missionaries along because it's required. So Catholic history begins in this region because of that. Now, what the Spanish are encountering here are the Pueblo peoples, and there's it's kind of confusing because Pueblo refers to anyone who's living in these Pueblo villages and not nomadic. But it's the Zuni, it's the Hopi, it's the Tewa. Those are the three main, but there's a bunch of other tribes as well. Now, these indigenous people follow the Kachina belief system, which is all about these ceremonial kivas, which are underground chambers where they perform dances for the first half of the year. They believe that the Kachinas are spirits that live in the mountains, and they come and inhabit them for the first half of the year, and they do dances for them to pacify them and to also in order to curry their favor for good crops and this type of thing. And they have kiva dolls as well and prayer sticks, and it's a pretty rich visual culture. And it's interesting, fascinating. This Kachina belief system and these Pueblo peoples live on the ruins of an older culture that has disappeared, and that was the Anasazi. Now, the Anasazi is a term that the natives have for, or the Pueblo natives have for it means the ancient ones, and it's interesting that the Pueblos are their descendants, but the civilization collapses around the year 1200. It's figured by archaeologists, and why that is a mystery. But consensus, the main argument for that is that it was environmental collapse, that they overextended themselves in the semi-arid region. That's very common among indigenous peoples, but amazing civilization with hundreds of villages and these incredibly linear roads that radiated out from the main center at Chaco Canyon over there, which incredible site. There's a kiva, a circular kiva in the Chaco Canyon, a big one. But the Pueblos still practice this kiva Kachina belief system into the era into the Spanish era. Here's some Anasazi. The Anasazi, by the way, when their civilization collapsed, even more fascinating, as they head into the mountains north and the hills, and they build these villages in these fortifications, which indicates that they were at warfare against each other at this point and taking refuge in Mesa Verde, one of the most amazing ruins in America, in Colorado there. In any case, Don Juan de Onat has this mandate to go mission and to set up missions and to colonize this region. And so he crosses the Rio Grande. He's the first to do that, first to have permanent settlements here, and you can see what he's made of and why he ends up getting recalled and banished by the Spanish. In fact, he's charged loses his governorship pretty quickly because of the way how brutal he is, and right from the very beginning we get a tension between the missionaries that he's required to take along and the provincial governor, and that's something that will be a perpetual theme in the Spanish era. Like I said, Don Juan de Onat comes up and Acoma Pueblo is where you see his brutality first, and what happens here is his nephew's coming along with a bunch of men. They're hungry, and they are invited by the Acoma Pueblo, which is this amazing, well-fortified pueblo in this, which is also called Sky City up here on this mesa. They're invited to come up, but it's a trick, and the Pueblos then start massacring Don Juan de Onat's nephew and his men. So a bunch of them jump off, and but a fair number are killed. Onat comes back a year later. He lays siege to this pueblo, and it takes him forever to get to the top. Actually, it's almost like a Masada incident. And when he does, he kills 800 natives, and he has 500 of them, all of them, the remainder taken prisoner, and has a 1 foot amputated from most of the men. So just a brutal retaliation type of thing. And again, it's the kind of thing that will have him recalled. But in this context, the missionaries are showing up in the Franciscan order, specifically on the authority of the Vatican. And the reason they do is because Onat is required to take them. So Santa Fe is where we have our first mission, and actually our first and oldest church, continuous church in what today is the United States, where there's still Mass held every Sunday. Franciscan friars are by 1600. This is Our Lady of Perpetual Sorrow, by the way. It's been rebuilt many times, but by 1600 there are dozens of Franciscan friars in separate Pueblo villages all over the place, each with a mission, which are always supposed to be temporary, with Spanish architecture in the church, designed to inspire the faith with this rich visual culture. And the natives get educated there and catechized at these missions, and then they work the mission fields in exchange for their education. And again, that's the Zuni, the Hopi, and the Tewa peoples. And the numbers at this point of those Native people is really hard to know, because epidemics have already hit them before the Spanish arrive, and that's another theme in the history of this region, much of Western North America, is that the epidemics are coming before the Europeans now. What we get in terms of religion is a real syncretism, because the Catholics and the Pueblos had similar value systems in some ways. Both the native and the newcomer Spanish were very hierarchical, and they both put value in bloodlines and primogeniture, so they have that in common culturally. And Catholicism is visually very rich, heavy in symbolism and ritual. And so it has this appeal that goes beyond language, unlike Protestantism. So there's enough in common here, and enough mutual miscomprehension and misunderstanding, that you get this blending of Catholicism and native religion that you still find there to this day, which I talked about before, right? The Virgin of Guadalupe being the great symbol of that, and mestizo culture being really about that. Over time, Franciscans get more serious, though, about erasing native culture. Initially, they're tolerant of it, and then and some of these friars could be downright brutal. And this is medieval era Europe, right? This is so it shouldn't surprise us. But pagan dances become outlawed because they're seen as a barrier. So the Kachina religion is much, and you know this story, right? Potlatch band and the rest, which and as with the potlatch band, very ineffective and difficult to enforce. So they simply go into the priests will go into the kivas to stop the ceremonies, but the religion simply goes underground. And already it's a much adapted religion. 1661 becomes a turnaround, because at that point the priests decide they will collect, make a statement, and they collect hundreds of the mass and prayer sticks, and they burn them in this massive bonfire. And Same time, you get this tension, and then the Kachina religion really goes underground. You're also getting this struggle building between church and state, between the provincial governor and the Franciscans, because the missionaries are seen as too powerful. And the provincial authorities are always jealous of their control over the native people, and and that they could use their power also to make the governor's men do what they wanted, because they can excommunicate, they can refuse communion, and this is a huge leverage that they have. So they not only seem to have the hearts and minds of the native people, which the provincial governor covets, but also over his own men, his own armed forces, his own militia, because they can excommunicate these men. So to undercut Franciscan influence, the governor of New Mexico in Santa Fe, he agrees to a request by one of the Pueblo settlements to overturn the ban on traditional dances. So trying to curry their favor, he reverses the Franciscan order. And what this does, though, and he doesn't intend this, is it leads to a revitalization of indigenous culture, a reawakening that's already happening in the context of a major drought. And your text covers this very briefly, though. So uh, now it's the governor who's getting repressive, because he's starting to fear an uprising. This Pueblo religious cultural revival is looking a lot like an uprising, and this sounds like the Wovoka religion and the ghost dance much later, the Battle of Wounded Knee, the massacre at Wounded Knee, because that's exactly what we're seeing here. And maybe you know that story. In any case, the governor then decides he must take action. He arrests about 50 of the natives. He charges them with sorcery, and he has 4 of them hung. So he has 4 of them executed. That causes more excitement, and it leads to this brutal revolt, which you read about in your text, and Pope's rebellion. Very well known, and it's the most brutal and most effective revolt in the Spanish era. And it's led by a Pueblo leader by the name of Pope, a warrior who believes he has to turn back the clock and get rid of any Catholic influence that's been brought here, any Spanish influence that's come to their people, and that this has been the start of all their problems. So there's been a series of revolts before this that come out of a combination of harsh treatment by the Spanish, and also sometimes might just be attempts to avoid starvation. But either way, the Pueblo community is in disarray, and yeah. By the same token, the missions by this point have become, and it's 80 years in now, 80 and some odd years into the Spanish control of this region. The missions have become islands of Spanish control, surrounded by Apache and Navajo raiders, so the enemies of the Pueblo people. And this is a big reason why the Pueblos are dependent on the missions. In any case, the Pope revolt is fairly effective. They kill over half the priests that live in this in New Mexico, along with hundreds of settlers, and the rest flee back to Mexico City. That 6-month journey south, and for 12 years, the Pope and his followers and other leaders that come after him are in control, and the Spanish are simply gone, which comes to an end because the unity among the Pueblos doesn't last, and the attempt to erase both the Spanish influence, both religious and non, is a complete fail, because you can't go backwards, and the natives rely on European technology by now. They're utterly dependent on it, and also he find even Pope himself has adopted some syncretism has come into even his worldview. So impossible to turn back the clock on the religious influences as well, which is fascinating. Long story short, too late. the Spanish do return, and and with Pueblo acquiescence. It's not as simple as that, but if you want more depth, you can read deeper into it. But what we get coming out of that is a greater acceptance by the Spanish, by the Franciscans of syncretism. So they are more flexible in their approach. And also an abandonment by the Spanish of the encomienda system. And so that is New Mexico. And actually, just to cap off New Mexico and put this one to a close, just a couple themes as we get into the 18th century. One is, it should be, well, it's a standard one, it's a common one anywhere in the Spanish era, is a massive demographic collapse of the indigenous population in the order of 90%. So what we get is a demographic takeover of Spanish and the dominance of the mestizo culture. So the numbers completely reverse themselves, where the Spanish go from being 10% of the population at the beginning of the century to the natives being, Native Americans being in that realm at the end of it. What we also have among those, the mission settlements, the mission pueblos, is continual threat from the Comanche, Apache, and Navajo, who and paradoxically become much stronger because of the Spanish presence and the introduction of the horse, and ironically, much more so after Pope's rebellion, because he's selling off horses to his enemies, who become much stronger because of them. And so, and this really is a major theme of why the natives, the pueblos, are in the missions. They're protected. So kind of like islands of Spanish control, surrounded by hostile enemies, and that's something that continues right through the Spanish era and also into the Mexican era, where the Mexicans have issues with the Apache and Navajo, and into the American era as well. Now the Comanche are interesting because they're Comancheria is this massive area that's really northwest Texas, and they're expanding as well. They're growing into the New Mexico area and threatening Santa Fe. But the provincial governor of Santa Fe comes to an alliance with the Comanche Nation, and at that point, the Comanche focus their raiding, their depredations against the Spanish in Texas. So they leave the Spanish in New Mexico alone because this alliance said respect that and go over to the Spanish in Texas, San Antonio and whatnot. So that's somewhat interesting. But and the other point here, and we'll see this as well as we go on to Texas and California, is that the missions will be closed, secularized finally after Mexican independence. So this idea that the missions should be temporary, much like reservations in Canada and America, until the natives are schooled in a craft and assimilated, Christianized, and turned into useful laborers, whatnot, never really happens until it finally does with Mexican independence. And at that point, it happens because the Mexican government, well, they go into a long debate after the end of the Mexican Revolutionary War against the Spanish, which goes on for about 10 to 12 years, ends in 1824, but it's not till 1833 that the Mexican government decides in Mexico City to close all the missions, and largely that's because landowners covet mission lands, which is often the richest and best lands anywhere in what had been New Spain. I guess there's a lot of money to be made by closing the missions. And most of that land, which was supposed to go to the native people, ends up in the hands of the rancherios, the Spanish, the Mexican settlers. Okay? And I'll talk about how in California that eventually reverses itself in the lands, and in Texas, and the lands will go back, much of them, to the indigenous people that they were meant for. In any case, so that is it. Missions closed. And the last point there is, and I've made it before, is the growing acceptance of syncretism among the Franciscan during the mission period in the 18th century. And you see that in the art there, and you see that here in this in native artwork that starts to adorn the mission chapels, and much more so than the European art. So it's a good symbol here of the of the changing values in that direction. Any case, so that's it, and this has gotten long enough, so I'm going to close this one and then separate PowerPoint lecture for Texas and California. All right, thanks for listening. Take care.